Welcome to the AirCon Vault, recordings of the live streams from AirWiggle's audio conference. These are made free thanks to our sponsors, A Sound Effect, Game Audio Learning, Kilohertz, Audio Kinetic, Sound Cuts, Tsugi, Boom Library, Sound Warriors, and AirWiggles, the online home for audio people.
Welcome everybody to yet more Confessions of an Audio Professional. I've got a lot to get through, a lot of waffling, a lot of questionable professionalism. This time it's twice as confessional and half as professional. So for those of you that don't know who I am, who am I? Why should anybody care? I'm Ross. I get paid to make sounds. Sometimes I even do it for free. I'm a lead sound designer at the moment in a place called Laced Audio. We're an outsourcing team, and we work with on a large range of projects, from kind of small indie projects to AAA and everything in between. My day-to-day work is basically sound design, but also a lot of managing projects and teams as well. And it's been 1 year since my last confession. This is my second time doing a version of this talk. The first one seemed to be successful, so they, I'm going again. There was things left on the table that were left unsaid. This is a vanity shot of me next to a big old diffuser, just so you know, just so you're very sure that I work in audio. Either that or I'm a terrible carpenter. Here's what I call my my ego wall, just projects that I've worked on. Some of these I'm immensely proud of. Some of them I didn't have a clue what I was doing at the time. A couple of them, my contribution to them is so minuscule that to the point of just being inaudible. So, that's what you get, when you've worked on a lot of different projects in a lot of different capacities. But yes, this is some projects that I've worked on. We'll get into a little brief recap of part one. As I said, this is part two. I'm not really going to go into the details here, but these are the confessions in part one, 7 confessions. And basically, all of this is born out of a moment of existential crises, or perhaps existential dread, as it were, that happened, one night at 4 a.m. when all of the best things happened to you. Where I just could not sleep, and I took out my phone and I opened a notepad application and I wrote down all of the things that I felt, there was immensely self-conscious about as a sound designer, as a professional sound designer. And it was a long list. Let me tell you, it was a long list. I didn't really know what I was doing with this. And then when AirWiggles asked me to do a talk, I thought, okay, well, why not? What better way to address this particular existential crisis, but just tell the entire world, my deepest insecurities. So I'm going to go again. I'm going to do the exact same thing again, because last time it seemed like it was quite popular. Here are some comments. You'll never work in this industry again. I finally feel seen. So, it did resonate with some people. I thought this was going to be informative. This talk has become mandatory viewing for my team as an example of what not to do. I feel so much better knowing that there are others in this job that suck way more than me. When does Nathan Moody's talk start? And needs more bass. But finally, I could happily listen to you humiliate yourself for another hour. So here we are. I'm going to humiliate myself for another hour. And in an effort to one-up myself, last year was like I cut pretty deep, but this year, I have to go deeper, right? What could I possibly do? I was thinking that would, potentially sabotage my career even further, and I came up with this. This is confession number 8, following on from last year. I lied on my CV. There you go. I've said it. That's the end of my career for sure now. Absolutely. Let's get into it, shall we? Okay, this is my CV as it currently stands. I promise that I did not hastily whip this together for the purposes of this talk. It's got your standard CV stuff. It's my name, which is, relatively accurate. This little profile section here, mostly true, despite, some questionably flowery language. Experience, I'm guilty of some minor embellishments here, but who isn't? Then we get to the skills section down here. Alternative facts. Oh, okay. Enhance, as they say. Let's look at my skills. This is a pretty standard dump of things that I've accumulated over the years. Skills, right? We love them. We like to collect them. Second point here, let's look, okay. Expert in knowledge of Reaper, Ableton Live, Isotope RX, Cubase, Sony SoundForge, and then I go to say certified Pro Tools operator for post-production and music. Okay, let's be honest. I haven't touched these apps in years. Cubase, Sony SoundForge, is all but dead. There are people out there who cling on to it, but it was a wonderful application, but I haven't used it in years, and I no longer have a use for it in my workflow. As for Pro Tools, I am a certified Pro Tools operator. I have a T-shirt that's at least 4 sizes too big for me to prove it. But once again, I haven't used Pro Tools on a day-to-day basis in about 10 years. And I was sorely reminded of this recently when I had to dip into a session and export some audio from a Pro Tools session. And it took me about an hour. I could not do it. It was just, my word, so difficult. Anyway, let's go on. Expert in audio kinetic wires, Fmod, and advanced audio implementation techniques for interactive and XOR media applications. My word, am I trying to, it's a vague catch-all statement of what I've said here. I'm really trying to cram a lot of experience into a very short bullet point here. And I'm not really sure that it's doing any good, but whatever. Let's move on. Working knowledge of advanced development workflows, including Perforce, Git, SVN, Jira, and Handsoft. This is just a brief mention of all the things that, for me, fall into the necessary evil category. I hate all of this stuff, but I have to put it in my CV because, it helps me get my job done. Anyway, skilled in Python, C#, HTML, and CSS. HTML and CSS, irrelevant, arguably. I used to do web design before I became a sound designer. And this is just, these things have just stuck around like a bad smell in my CV. As for Python and C#, I think I would probably rate my skills in that based on trips to Stack Overflow per minute. And currently I'm somewhere up near, 20 trips per minute, right? If we can get that down to about 5, I'd be doing well. But anyway, ha ha ha. All of this is to say that I'm going to use the analogy here that skills are like a trophy cabinet, right? We like to collect them and we like to display them in the trophy cabinet of our CVs or resumes, if you want to call it that. And the thing about trophies is, that they really do need to be dusted off from time to time. And I think I'm guilty, and that my particular trophies have developed a thick layer of dust, and some of them just really need a good seeing to. But the thing is, it is within me. There's something deep within me that just wants to learn, okay? And I go from learning one new skill to another on a week-by-week basis. Just, it depends on what the flavor of the week is for me. It depends on what kind of job I'm doing. Is there anything I can employ in my current workflow that might help me out? And I seem to flit between different skills. And for better or worse, whether intentionally or not, this has made me T-shaped in my distribution of skills. Now, many people may have heard about what T-shaped, skill distribution is. You often hear about it in kind of recruitment. You often hear about it referred to in terms of, software development as well, because it's a desirable thing, right? So for those of you who don't know, a T-shaped skill distribution in somebody would be somebody who has a shallow knowledge in a broad range of areas, but a deep knowledge in one specific area, okay? So what are the benefits? Allows for kind of better communication and understanding among team members of different disciplines. The ability to contribute to multiple aspects of a project, right? Because you've got all these skills to draw from, and you can say, particularly in smaller teams as well, you can, everybody shares the load across a wider range of things. Excuse me. Broad knowledge allows for a more holistic view of problems encounter, okay? So problem solving, you have a better overview of the entire project and all of the kind of workings of that project, and it means that you can kind of come at problem solving from a very like interdisciplinary way, to use kind of buzzwords, but basically you can find ways of connecting up the dots, as it were, because you've just got a broader knowledge base. And then exposure to multiple fields can lead to like faster, more effective learning, as skills and knowledge from one area can enhance understanding in another, right? So for instance, programming, if you learn one programming language, those skills are kind of somewhat easily transferable to other programming languages, and the more you learn, the easier it becomes, right? So all of these things are kind of true. An interesting exercise, though, is to think about what shape of T best describes your skill specialization, because not all shapes of T are the same. And if I was to categorize me, I would say this is me. It's quite a misshapen, kind of long and thin on top and quite stubby on the bottom, and don't laugh. So, I've got a somewhat comprehensive sound design expertise. I can, hang my hat on that. And there's a breadth of knowledge in adjacent areas, right? I know what I'm doing. I know things either side of what this is. And then you've got this kind of decreasing in relevance as they get towards the outer edges, and then maybe on the one of the outer edges here, you have something called like maybe basket weaving, for instance, which is a skill that maybe I do have, maybe I don't, but and I've yet to find a way of integrating it into my sound design workflow. But did I actually lie in my CV? Let's just wrap up the whole T-shaped thing. It is a good thing, right? It's a good thing to be T-shaped. But I'm definitely guilty of, maybe a lack of focus sometimes, and learning too much, if that is even a bad thing. But it means that you kind of need to, every so often, think about, the skills that are actually useful in your job. And sometimes you need to dip back in and give them some love, So that's kind of the moral of this particular point. Anyway, so I did actually lie in my CV. Let's just hide behind some stats here. A study by resumebuilder.com found that approximately 55% of Americans have lied on their resumes at least once, with common falsehoods including exaggerations about their years of experience, educational background, and the duration of their previous positions. Another survey by Resume Lab revealed that while 36% openly admit to lying on their resumes, when more specific questions were asked, it was found that up to 56% had stretched the truth in some way. So, answer is yes, but I'm not alone, am I? At least I hope I'm not. Please say in the comments that I'm not alone. Please. Okay, let's move on. Confession number 9. Most of my best work has been the result of a happy accident. At least that's what I think. So, in my previous talk, I made this nice Venn diagram, and I thought it's so nice that I really don't want it to go to waste, and I just copied and pasted it back here. I went into a little bit of detail about how you divide up your time between sound design and research, and how there's kind of a little bit in the middle that's part sound design and part research, and it's your kind of exploratory sound design with no set goal. I want to talk about this side of things here, the kind of attribution of time between focused sound design and more exploratory sound design. So if I was to kind of quantify my level of satisfaction in my own work based on whether I'm doing focused, goal-oriented sound design, and by that I mean, you've got a deadline, you have, there's a brief, you have a set amount of work to do, you need to produce this amount of assets, get them in the game, and we're going to ship the game. So it's very much like, nose to the grindstone, get your stuff done, right? And then exploratory being you're just noodling, right? You're having fun, you're learning new skills, thinking about new workflows, just having fun, right? With sound design. That's the difference. So my level of satisfaction is heavily weighted towards exploratory sound design. I would say that I'm most often happy with the results of my work when I'm doing something, when I'm just doodling. I'm quite often not happy with the results of my work when it's goal orientated. And I find that it's often a little bit more of a slog to, create that sound that's in your head and to somehow try and manifest that out of thin air and actually be able to look back at it and say, yes, I've nailed it. Whereas when I'm working on something that's kind of just, exploratory and comes from a place of, fun and me just having, exploring new directions, I kind of end up looking back and going, oh, that was an amazing thing that happened there. That was a happy accident. That was a moment of serendipity. And I'm constantly chasing that feeling now. It's a thing that I've tried to bring into my sound design workflow as much as possible. It is an endless quest for the happy accident for me. I've made YouTube videos on it when I thought I was going to become a YouTuber. I've created long, complex, weird, esoteric effects chains. I've purchased admittedly expensive pieces of equipment and modular rigs trying to achieve chaos and randomness and happy accidents. I've even gone so far as to write an application which I called Grandomizer, which I haven't even released to the public, but it's just an application that takes in incoming audio. You can feed it files, it'll cut them up and mash them together in random ways and apply weird effects to each little grain, and it spits out just garbled nonsense. But within that garbled nonsense, there are just moments of pure bliss, right? And I always end up dipping into these kind of recordings that I do and using them in interesting ways. Okay, so let me continue. This is kind of a brief rundown of my process, right? I'll design some kind of a self-contained chaotic system that either processes incoming audio stream or generates audio by itself in some way. Now, there are so many ways to do this. I'm not even going to get into the details of this, but you can look into Ableton Bitwig. The Kilohertz Suite, Snap Heap, and Phase Plant are really good. VCV Rack are all very good. These are ones that I tend to go to more often than not. But there are so many other options. You can get even deeper into it by doing Max for Live stuff. There are so many options, right? And basically, to sum it up, it usually for me involves some kind of random LFOs, cross-modulating different parameters, and directing the audio stream in different ways randomly and just seeing what comes out the other end. And lots of phasers. Phasers everywhere. I will record long stretches of output. I get lost in it. Honestly, I can hit record and 2 hours later I will press stop and I'll have a 2-hour session of just absolute chaos, and within that time I'll be tweaking little parameters. If I'm at my modular rig, it'll be little bits of patching here and there, just trying to gently guide the flow of audio and kind of just go where inspiration takes me. And that's my next point, trying not to limit myself to any specific goal. But it's also useful to have a seed of an idea as a jumping off point, right? So it's not just completely out of thin air. Maybe you have this idea, oh well, what if I modulated this parameter, or well, you get the idea, right? And then I try to add markers to remember points of interest, those kind of lightning in the bottle moments. That often doesn't happen, and usually I completely fail to integrate these recordings into my library in any useful way, because the output is just inherently uncategorizable. And let me get to the pros and cons, right? So the pros of this is it's just immensely fun, right? This kind of process is very freeing, particularly after a long day of really trying to achieve one specific goal. It is it's so much fun. It's essentially jamming, right? You are jamming as a sound designer, and it really, it's a real palate cleanser, as it were. It encourages you to explore new territories in sound design. Just throw the rule book out the window, do whatever you feel like, basically, and you end up with masses of new library material. The results can be unique, giving you like lots of happy accident material to add to your sound design. This is just, usually what I'll do is I'll try to categorize these recordings as best I can, usually by the date, the kind of a rough kind of description of the process that was involved in making it. But beyond that, the output can be so chaotic and so random that there's no point in even trying to go further. You could probably snip out bits in here and there and say, okay, well, this is a gunshot sweetener, this is a bass drop, but it would just take all day. But usually I end up having like a mental picture of where I was and what I was doing at that moment, and I can go to that recording and think, oh yeah, I remember there was a bit at this section that I really enjoyed, and I'll go in there and I'll dip into it and say, oh yeah, this is the perfect UI sound for this particular this particular piece of sound design that I need to do. The cons, however, it just doesn't always produce usable results. You're jamming, and sometimes it's just not working, and what you come out with is just crap, right? And you have to live with that as well. The output can defy categorization. We kind of said that. It's very difficult to like be accurate about what you're give it accurate labels, I guess. And similarly, it's difficult for producing repeatable results. Not always the case, but depending on your process. But particularly with game audio, and like a lot of my mindset is targeting game audio, and if you want to have like variations on a single sound, this isn't always the best way to do it. And it can't generally be integrated into like a focused sound design workflow as well. Like this is just procrastination central, right? It is a way of completely indulging in procrastination, but having fun too. So are the results of this approach inherently better? My theory is that probably not. I think probably I get far too into my own head and self-critical when I'm doing focused sound design, and it's easy to kind of lose perspective on it, and you need to go out and kind of ask other people to give you opinions. But I think for me, with this kind of process, the enjoyment of the process just outweighs its lack of efficiency, and I'm likely more drawn to the idea that like allowing serendipity or chaos to have some role in my process somehow makes the results more unique. And I think that is what it boils down to. Adding a little bit of unique kind of fresh flavor to your humdrum sound design that you're doing, and just being able to draw from like a library of just random chaos. It really helps. But it's just the sugar and spice of sound design. You can treat it like a condiment. I think that's basically all on this point. But talking about the idea of like relinquishing control of your creative output to some kind of external machine process, it brings me neatly into that was what they call a segue in the trade, neatly into my next point, which is I'd happily be replaced by AI, at least in some aspects of my job. Let's start by listing the tasks that I like doing and the tasks that I don't like doing. Now, this may differ for everybody. Everybody has their own tastes. This is not exhaustive, but here we go, right? I love brainstorming. I love concepting. I love problem solving. I love workflow design and planning, believe it or not. Even though it does seem boring, it's actually quite gratifying, I find. Designing cool sounds, that's our bread and butter. That's what we're here for, right? That's what I like doing. Implementation design as well, anything to do with game audio implementation and figuring out the way that you're going to construct this particular set of sounds and chuck them into the game so it all sounds great. Mixing, immensely enjoyable. Writing, recording music, yes, love it. Directing, recording voiceover sessions, these are all things I really, really like doing in my job. On the flip side, tasks I don't like doing: labeling, categorizing, field recordings. You would never have guessed. Extensive library searches, things like where you need to really deep dive into libraries. You might be putting together like a sub-library for a particular project, and you just want to gather lots and lots of assets to kind of put them in the same place. If you're doing that kind of thing, that can get quite monotonous, for me at least. Manually labeling assets for exports. This is something we've all done. You know, if you're doing this extensively and repetitively, it can get annoying. Extensive dialogue editing, you know, a little bit of dialogue editing for me is quite enjoyable. Then I kind of end up crossing a threshold where it gets into just being painful. Repetitive implementation in any kind of thing where you're just, you know, you've got hundreds of assets that you need to repeat a process, but it hasn't quite crossed that threshold of warranting you going out and writing a script to do it for you, you know, that kind of thing. Extensive audio cleanup and restoration, similar, I guess, to dialogue editing, but it's you know, if you've had to clean up lots of files, yeah, it just doesn't interest me that much. Attending overly frequent stand-up meetings. There we go. There we have it. I see people saying I actually really love labeling and cataloging. Like, that's, yeah, like everybody has their own likes and dislikes, right? You know, and it's amazing. I love that, you know, that's why the industry works, because some people love it and some people hate it. Anyway, interesting thought exercise to do this. And I'm going to try and segue very clunkily into AI, and how could we potentially leverage AI, and let's think about leveraging AI to do some of the things that you don't like doing, right? And it presents a little bit of a quandary, doesn't it? There's a little bit of an AI dilemma here. And it's really about balancing, you know, the time and effort that you save in employing AI to like offloading, you know, a particular task that you don't like to AI, versus the negative moral implications of doing so. And I guess what I mean by that is, like, I'm sure we've all been reading up on it, but, you know, I would kind of categorize this by saying anything that is ripping off other creators in some ways, right? Its learning algorithm is training off of the creative output of others. Okay, so that's where the negative moral implications are at the moment, at least for me anyway. So I put together this chart. On this axis here, is this the x-axis, isn't it? I should know, right? Time and effort saved. On this axis, what I call the ick factor, right? This is how shitty it makes you feel, really, to be utilizing AI to do this particular task for you, right? So if you see, green is, you know, it doesn't feel too bad, feels okay, and then red, getting towards red, it makes you feel really shitty to be using AI to do this particular task for you. So things in the green here, repetitive implementation saves quite a bit of time. And I wouldn't feel too bad about using AI to do repetitive implementation. I don't think. Categorizing field recordings, if AI could do that for me, I would feel quite good about that. And yes, I feel like that would save me a lot of time. Sound effect library assistance, I don't know what I'm talking about there, but yeah, it seems, you know, something that I would do. Sound effects cleanup, getting a little bit sketchier, but yes, could save a lot of time. And, you know, yeah, sure. Placeholder sound effects creation, interesting one. Yes, getting a little bit ickier now, because you're definitely not only drawing on others' creative output, but you're also, what I was going to say, I don't know, train of thought is gone, but you're drawing on other people's creative output, even if it's not making the final product, as it were. Generating placeholder dialogue, similar. Mixing, you know, getting into very icky territory, even though there are tools out there at the moment with the likes of Isotope, which do kind of help you mix things. And then it gets, I'm not going to go into all of these, but basically it gets up a little bit further into things like, you know, modifying pre-recorded dialogue, generating final dialogue, very icky. Music composition, my God, sound effects creation, terrible, right? And all of these are varying different levels of kind of time and effort saved, right? All of these points are very arbitrarily placed on this graph. Like, I'm not a statistician, but if I was pretending to be a statistician, I might draw a line like this, and we might call it the icky line that I'm not going to cross, right? Everything on this side of the line is kind of okay. Yeah, that's fine. You know, attending stand-up meetings just misses the cut. If I could get AI to attend stand-up meetings for me, you know, I might actually bump that up a bit. I could probably do that. Yeah. I don't know. What's the point of the exercise? I really don't know. It was all, I'm sure I had an idea when I did it, but it's interesting to kind of, to think about at least. I'm sure nobody's learned anything. It's kind of summed up by this little screenshot comment that I saw on Reddit last week. And, you know, this person, Joanna, I'm not even going to try and pronounce her name, but she said, I want AI to do my laundry and dishes so I can do art and writing, not for AI to do my art and writing so I can do my laundry and dishes. That's kind of what it boils down to for me. If I can offload some of my repetitive tasks that I don't particularly enjoy doing to allow me to focus on doing more noodling, creating more chaotic sound effects chains, I'm all for it. Please bring it on. Yeah. And AI Ross will be doing part 3 next year. Yes, that is correct. Confession number 11. We're getting there. I'm actually going quicker than I thought I would. Anyway, I struggle most with designing short, transient sounds. So I'm going to tell a little. Am I going to tell a little anecdote? I can't remember. Oh yes, one of the first projects I worked on as one of the first large projects that I worked on in game audio was a game on Xbox 360 called Scream Ride. And I was tasked with doing the UI sounds on this game. And I was quite green. And I thought to myself, you know, how hard can it be, right? UI sounds, short, blippy bloops. Simple, you know, they're not very long. This is going to be a piece of cake. And how wrong I was. And I'm sure that there are many others who have learned this the hard way as well. UI sounds are quite tricky for a number of reasons. And I made the mistake of kind of leaving it a little bit late in the project and then not really giving myself enough time to iterate on them. And there was a lot of there was just a lot of messiness in them, and I feel like I didn't really create a cohesive experience across the entire game with the UI sounds. And that might be just me being self-critical. Maybe the average listener doesn't care, and that's probably true as well. But I've it's a hard learned lesson, and I feel like I've learned some lessons about it over the years. So I'm going to kind of go through the challenges as I see them in designing short sounds, and we'll get into like how, you know, short sounds versus long sounds a little bit later. So often when you're doing short sounds, and I'll probably come back to the examples of UI sounds, I'll probably also come back to the examples of weapon sounds as well, because they're kind of on opposite ends of the spectrum, but there's similarities between them in some ways in the way your brain processes this information. But they need to convey a lot of information in a really short space of time, okay? And that in itself is inherently difficult, because it's really easy to just over egg the pudding, right? It's really easy. And I talked about this in my last talk as well, that, you know, sound designers are, you know, one of the first skills you learn is layering sounds on top of each other to create something, you know, that is more than the sum of its parts. But, you know, falling back on that, it's easy to just to do that without thinking, and then you end up with, you know, a mess that lacks kind of clarity and focus, right? And yeah, you need to be careful of that with short sounds. The other thing is our brains are just simply more attuned to short sounds, and I'll get into a little bit of kind of science background on that, which is kind of interesting. I did a little bit of research, and yeah, our brain just behaves differently when we hear short transient sounds than it does longer, kind of drawn out sounds. And as a result, they can become easily annoying, right? So the shorter sounds that you hear can often poke their heads up above the parapet of annoyance and go, "Here, look at me, look at me, look at me," and you have to go and shoot them down, right? That's oh my God, that was a terrible analogy, but anyway, you get the idea. Shaping transient envelopes is a difficult skill to master, and I would say it's one of the things that often, as you know, people who work in audio, it's one of the things that kind of clicks later on. people talk about, you know, when you're getting into working with audio, you know, how how difficult it is to get your head around the idea of compression. And compression is all about, you know, shaping the transient. And for me, I can admit, yes, you know, shaping the transient is something that, you know, definitely clicked for me later in my career. And then a further example, talking about probably more specifically about things like, you know, gunshot audio, is like any kind of sharp, you know, quick onset sounds that you're trying to, you know, place in an environment in a diegetic sense can really sound unnatural if you're not, you know, treating them very carefully. And that kind of goes back to, you know, we're so sensitive to these things that, you know, it's easy for us to feel like something is just wrong. And we might not be able to tell why it's wrong, but we can tell that it just doesn't sound right. Okay, so let's get into the science bit. Here's a terrible meme with a very outdated reference. So this is a little bit of a kind of a little dive into how your brain hears and processes short transient sounds versus kind of longer drawn out passages of audio. My wife is a neuroscientist and she helped me with this section. So short sounds, you get something called rapid onset response. The auditory system is highly responsive to sudden changes in sound pressure, right? It's just super attuned to this kind of thing. And with that, you get these brief bursts of neural activity, right? And the sciencey spiel here is that there's very little temporal integration, which kind of just means like, you know, your neurons aren't firing for that very, very long. And one of the interesting things about how our brain processes short sounds then is that we use, you know, there's more of a particular reliance on these things called interaural time and interaural level differences. And basically that means, you know, the difference between of arrival of a sound between your left and right ear, and the difference in level as well between your left and right ear. And we use that information in our brains to like localize the sound, so we can say, oh, okay, the tiger is over there, run this way. Long sounds, then longer processing time, continuous neural firing and monitoring, right? So kind of things sink into the background a little bit more. You get this thing called auditory stream segregation. So our brain can separate out layers of audio when we hear them for extended periods of time, much like you could if you're listening to an orchestra. You know, you can pick out the various instruments, you know, the woodwinds, the brass, the violas, you know, and we can pick out different like melodies within that. Whereas, you know, with shorter sounds, it's kind of very difficult to kind of separate the layers and say, okay, well, this sound is composed of these layers, right? And in terms of cognitive processing, then, you know, longer sounds allow for a greater involvement in cognitive processes like attention and working memory, right? So our brain can focus on specific aspects of the sound, and then we can kind of retain that information a little bit better over time. Okay, so if you want to kind of sum that up, I guess it means that, you know, longer sounds can be a bit more memorable. And if you think of it like this, you know, it's kind of easier to kind of picture the sonic signature of, you know, some kind of a melodic phrase in your mind than it is to picture the kind of tonality of a gunshot, as it were. I don't know, maybe that's a good example, maybe it's not. I'm not a scientist, but I did include my references, which my wife told me to do. Explain it to my caveman brain. I think, and in an anthropological sense, right? This is fine. I promise I will move on from the science shit because I'm clearly not qualified for this. But basically, anthropologically, our brains are just hardwired for detecting danger, and often it's the short sounds, the short transient audio means danger. Anything that goes bang, anything that goes snap, there's a twig breaking in the other side of the woods, that means danger is coming, right? So it is. It's Encino Man. Yes. Yeah. So we're hardwired, right? So with all that in mind, I don't know, is that just a digression that isn't in any way useful? But I put together some tips. And for me, like, the biggest tip really is, and it's easy to say and hard to do, but less is more. And every layer should really have its place. And you need to be ruthless about the inclusion of different layers. If it's not working, or if it doesn't contribute in any meaningful way, or if it's not adding character, or if it's muddying things up, it needs to go. And as I said, this is something that's easy to say, and we hear less is more very often, but it's so difficult to actually employ this mindset and to actually, come out the other end of doing a piece of sound design and go, yes, I was as minimalistic as I could be there. It's very easy to keep adding more. Similarly, a focus on clarity and purity. One of the things that I like to do, and particularly with UI as well, anything UI related, is to try to achieve everything that I need to achieve with a single sound source. And that could be, there could be an oscillator. It could be me recording, something percussive, wood blocks or something. But having it just be a single audio stream, a single sound source, and then you can shape the transient, you can process it, add effects and whatnot. But often, constraining yourself to using a single sound source with these kind of things, particularly in UI, it probably doesn't work in weapon audio, for instance, as much. But it helps keeps things really clean and pure, and often, uncluttered, and it means that you can tell a little bit more in a little bit more of an efficient way. Another thing is just obsessing over the what is the thing that we start with when we're designing a new sound. Often it would be, more focused on the frequency content or the tonality of a sound. Those are the things we jump to first. What happens if you start with the envelope of a sound and then fill in the blanks of that template? I often find that, if you get the envelope of a sound right, and what I mean by that is, the attack, decay, sustain, release. If you get that right, you're on the right kind of path to making things sound natural and just sounding just so and right within the context of the thing that you're working on. Because it's things like, a harsh cutoff or a very sharp cutoff on an envelope. Those things can sound quite unnatural to the human ear. And similarly, just getting the onset of audio just right is something, that can really make the difference between something that sounds good or something that just sounds slightly out of place, right? So starting with the envelope, how would you do that? Maybe you can start with like white noise and try to shape the envelope in white noise, and say, okay, well, this is roughly where I want to be with the envelope of this sound. And then you start gathering source and filling in that, and then you take out your placeholder white noise. I'm not sure if that's going to actually work. I can't say that I've ever really done it, but it's an interesting way to think, at least, starting with the envelope and moving on from there. Here's another thing that I feel like maybe doesn't click until later on in a sound design career, and that's considering the balance between noise and tonality. And what I mean by that is, like, we all know what noise sounds like, white noise, the sound of a river flowing, the sound of waterfalls, wind. And tonality then being more, resonant frequencies within a sound that kind of give more character. And it's often the kind of tonal sounds that can give a piece of sound design place in a mix and have it sit nicely in the mix. Whereas noise can help convey, you know, kind of energy quite well. But if the balance is off between those two things and there's too much noise, you end up with just a mushy, muddy mess. And then on the flip side of that, if there's too much tonality, sometimes you can end up with something that's just sticking out in the wrong way, you know, out of a mix. So always considering the balance between those two, you know, those two elements is something that's really helpful in general sound design, but I think particularly helpful for working with kind of short transient audio. Iterate early, iterate often. Yeah, the short transient sounds for me are the things that I tend to work on first, because I know that when I get them into a game, for instance, that I will end up wanting to tweak them. And just don't leave UI sounds to the end of a project. That would be just a bad idea. That's my tip. Moving onwards. I see Chris Darcy has said noise is water, tone is bubbles. That's a really nice way of thinking about it, and I've never thought about it like that before. But yeah, it's a really good way of thinking about it. This is my last confession for today. I sometimes find myself emotionally detached from my own creative output. That sounds quite harsh. It sounds like the words of a very jaded man. Somebody told me once that if I don't have a quote from Sun Tzu, The Art of War, in a presentation, I'm not doing it correctly. So here's a quote from Sun Tzu, The Art of War. And a bonus admission, a bonus confession is that I have not read The Art of War, and I've merely just copied and pasted this quote because I felt like it actually summed up what I'm trying to convey here. Let's get into it. It is the unemotional, reserved, calm, detached warrior who wins, not the hothead seeking vengeance, and not the ambitious seeker of fortune. Let's tell another story. Earlier on in my career, I keep saying earlier on in my career, just as a way to distance myself from all of these particular just horrible moments that I'd rather not look back on, that I'm now telling everybody about. Sorry, I'm drinking a lot because I'm nervous, and I've also got a cold, which is not a particularly good combination. Anyway, yeah, so I was working in-house in a company, and I was working on a trailer for a game that I was working on. And I was working alongside a group of people, one of which was the art director on the project. And we got storyboards through for the trailer and the script, and we got like our kicking off point and our general idea, you know, this is what it's going to look like. And at that time, I was quite obsessed with the idea of, you know, everything had to tell a story. Everything had to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And to cut a long story short, I really disliked the direction that the trailer was going in. I kind of hated it, and I took it upon myself rather, you know, kind of foolhardily. Went off and did my own version. Right, I put together my own storyboard and kind of an audio mock-up of what we could do, and I wrote a completely different script for it. And I thought to myself, yes, my idea is better. And I was very, I was very passionate about my idea, and I was clinging to it very tightly, and I took it in front of the various creative stakeholders, and I thought, look at this. Is my idea not better than everybody else's? I probably didn't say it like that, but, you know, I think if you were to read between the lines, it would sound something like that. And of course it got shot down. And of course I got severely burned by this encounter. And I went away with quite the blow to self-esteem, I was emotional. I was definitely unreserved. I was not calm. I was severely attached. I definitely wasn't a warrior. Um, and, you know, you could say I was a hothead. I'm not sure I was seeking vengeance, but, you know, for the sake of this talk, let's say I was seeking vengeance. And I was most certainly an ambitious seeker of fortune. And I kind of often think about that moment in my career and look back at it and go like, oh, that guy was such an idiot. Um, and I won't go into the full details of it, but you know, that kind of sums it up, right? Um, Getting too attached to your own creative ideas is a very dangerous thing. Um, so I went from being in-house to being a contractor. Okay, so I was working freelance. I was working for, you know, a lot of different clients, a lot of different types of projects. And it's a big change from working on the same project for a long time scale. And it completely changes your perspective on your work and your role as a sound designer in a wider team, right? And I'm going to lay out some truths here, and these are extreme examples, but they're to illustrate a point. This is what you are now. You are a gun for hire, okay? You're a mercenary. You're not being paid to have an opinion, right? When you're a contractor. And you need to set aside your own creative inclinations. Quite often, this is the case. And you may very well dislike the creative direction. And you know what? Nobody cares. Now, as I said, these are extreme examples to illustrate a point. There are many examples, you know, that I could give where the opposite is the case, and that, you know, my services have been enlisted and I've been given you know, creative license to do what I want with the soundscape. But you know, when you're working in bigger projects and like AAA games and you're just slotting into a team, often this is very much the case where you need to be able to quickly jump on board with somebody else's creative direction, and you need to be able to, you know, sing off the same hymn sheet, as it were. And you know, it's my belief that working like this just makes you a better sound designer when you can kind of leave your opinions at the door and really, you know, help you know, play with the rest of the band, right? So why is this so? So you need to detach yourself from your own creative opinions, and you need to cater for somebody else's tastes, okay? And this is what forms the attachment, this detachment. And if you want to think about it in terms of feedback, right? Um, I don't think anybody really likes getting feedback. I certainly, you know, I've become used to it. I'm generally fine with somebody telling me they dislike it as long as they tell me specifically why they dislike it. But nobody really likes getting feedback. And it's one thing that I've had to learn is, like, you know, get your feedback early, right? So you know, at least you're on the same page. And then if you're doing that, the earlier you get your feedback, you can kind of, you're on a trajectory then to get less feedback as the project, you know, keeps going on. And then you suddenly kind of, it all clicks for you, okay? And you can say, okay, well, I know that this person wants it this way, so I'm going to gently steer what I'm doing that way. Moving on from that, you're forced to adopt just new creative processes and approaches that you wouldn't ordinarily try. Yeah, it just steers you in a different creative direction. And, you know, that in itself is inherently enriching as a sound designer, even if at the time it seems like a pain and that you're just being pushed outside your comfort zone, which is, I think, my next point. You know, you end up being put in these positions where you need to, every decision that you make has to be a very conscious one. Rather than falling back on old kind of habits and just doing things the way you always do them, you always have to be thinking about the brief and what the creative stakeholders in this project require. And in doing that and thinking about, you know, viewing things through that kind of a lens, you end up much more present in what you're doing as a sound designer, and you ultimately, right, you end up being more versatile and easier to work with. And that's kind of what it boils down to, right? Everybody wants to be a team player. And it's not to say that you don't ever get to have a creative opinion. All of those examples are quite extreme. But, you know, having this as kind of more of a default state means that you can be much more collaborative, and, you know, it's easier to be open to opinions. So have I become creatively detached? That sounds like a bad thing, but it's actually really more of a resilience, really, in some ways, if you want to think about it like that. And it means that you're, yeah, as I said, just versatile, easier to work with. So this marks kind of the end of my talk for now. Looks like I've actually done this on time, which is good. But if anybody wants to get in contact with me, or if anybody has any questions, they can PM me on AirWiggles. That's probably the easiest way. I know that there's a chat. What is the Hangout? If anybody wants to ping me a message there, they can. I'm on LinkedIn, of course. I'll also be at Develop this year. If anybody wants to just, meet up, ping me a message. Let's grab a beer. I haven't really had a chance to look at the comments all that much, just glancing at them. So I don't know, Lewis, if there's any particular questions that you thought, when does Nathan Moody's talk start? Yeah. Okay, I can't answer that. But yeah, if there's any questions, just let me know. And thank you all so very much for listening. I hope this was at least entertaining. Probably wasn't all that informative in places, but yeah, thank you so much, and it's been a pleasure. And yeah, maybe there will be a part 3, but I am kind of running out of material, so we'll see. I might just have to start making stuff up. All right, take care. Bye bye. Love you all.